The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of the small white church in Wyatt, Kansas, casting ribbons of colored light across the worn wooden pews, and Franklin Bishop noticed the woman in the third row, whose Sunday dress had a long tear running down the side seam, exposing the patched fabric of her undergarments. It was July 1876, and the heat already pressed against the walls of the building like an unwelcome guest. Franklin shifted in his seat near the back, his hat resting on his knee, trying to focus on Reverend Thompson's sermon about compassion and charity. But his eyes kept drifting to the woman with dark blonde hair pinned neatly beneath a faded blue bonnet. She sat straight-backed and dignified despite the obvious poverty that showed in her mended clothing. He had seen her around town a few times, always keeping to herself, always looking worn but determined. The woman seemed unaware of the tear, or perhaps she simply had no choice but to wear the dress regardless. Franklin felt something tighten in his chest. He knew what it was like to have nothing. He had grown up with nothing. His mother had sewn patches upon patches on his clothes until there was more patch than original fabric. But that was years ago, before he had started working cattle drives and saving every penny he could. When the service ended and people filed out into the blazing Kansas sunshine, Franklin watched the woman gather a small boy, no more than 5 years old, and hurry down the church steps. She kept one hand pressed to her side, clearly trying to hold the torn fabric together. Her cheeks were flushed with what he recognized as embarrassment. Franklin walked slowly back to his rented room above the general store, his mind working. He had been in Wyatt for 3 months now, working at the nearby Granger Ranch, breaking horses and mending fences. He was good with his hands, patient and steady. The work paid well enough that he had started to save for his own piece of land someday. But today, his savings did not feel as important as helping that woman. He changed out of his Sunday clothes and into his work pants and shirt, then walked to Miller's Dry Goods on Main Street. The bell above the door jangled as he entered. Mrs. Miller looked up from her counter, her round face breaking into a smile. "Franklin, what brings you in on a Sunday afternoon?" "I need some fabric, madam. Something sturdy. Good quality. Enough for a woman's dress." Mrs. Miller's eyebrows rose with interest, but Franklin kept his expression neutral. He was 24 years old, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that he kept short. Women in town had shown interest in him, but he had kept to himself, focused on his work and his goals. This was different, though. This was not about courting or impressing anyone. This was about simple human decency. "I have a lovely blue calico that just came in, Mrs. Miller said, moving to a shelf lined with bolts of fabric. "And this cream muslin is very practical. Washes well." Franklin examined both options. The blue calico was prettier, but the cream muslin seemed more versatile. He thought about the woman's torn dress, the faded blue that had probably once been her best garment. She would need something practical, something that would last. "I'll take 6 yards of the muslin," he said, "and some matching thread if you have it, Mrs." Miller measured and cut the fabric, wrapping it carefully in brown paper. Franklin paid and tucked the package under his arm. Back in his room, he sat at the small desk by the window and pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil. Writing did not come easy to him. He had only a few years of scattered schooling, taught by his mother mostly, but he could manage a simple note. He started and stopped 3 times, crumpling the failed attempts. What did he say? He did not want to embarrass her further by mentioning that he had noticed the tear. But he also did not want her to think this was some kind of advance that came with expectations. Finally, he wrote in his careful, slightly uneven script, "I noticed you could use this. No need for thanks or anything else, just want to help. A friend." He read it over twice, then folded it and tucked it into the package. Now came the tricky part. He needed to find out where she lived without asking around and starting gossip. Small towns thrived on gossip, and the last thing he wanted was to make things harder for her. Franklin waited until evening when the streets grew quiet. He walked casually through town, noting which houses showed signs of life. Wyatt was not large, maybe 200 people on a good day. Most folks lived either in town or on the surrounding farms and ranches. He had seen the woman walking east after church, toward the older part of town where the original settlers had built their homes. He spotted the boy first, playing in the dusty yard of a small house that had seen better days. The paint had long since peeled away, and the porch sagged on one side. But the yard was neat, the small garden carefully tended. The boy was pushing a toy horse made from wood and string, making quiet neighing sounds. Franklin walked past without stopping, memorizing the location. When darkness fell and the town settled into sleep, he returned with the package. His boots made soft sounds on the worn porch boards. He set the fabric down carefully by the door, adjusting it so the note would be visible, then stepped back down and walked away quickly, his heart beating harder than it should for such a simple act. The next morning, Franklin was up before dawn as usual. He rode out to the Granger ranch and spent the day working with a particularly stubborn roan mare that did not want to accept a saddle. The work was hot and demanding, requiring all his focus. But in the back of his mind, he wondered if the woman had found the package, what she had thought, whether she was angry or grateful or confused. Sunday came around again, and Franklin dressed carefully in his clean clothes. He had 2 shirts and he chose the better one, then wondered why he was bothering. He arrived at church early and took his usual spot near the back. People filtered in, greeting each other, sharing news about crops and cattle prices and whose daughter was being courted by whom. Then she walked in and Franklin forgot to breathe. She wore a new dress made from the cream muslin he had left. It fit her well, simple but neat, with careful stitching along the seams. Her hair was pinned up the same way, but she held her head higher today. The little boy walked beside her in clothes that were still patched but clean. She did not look around as she made her way to her usual pew, but her cheeks held a slight flush. Franklin found himself unable to look away. She was not beautiful in the way of the fancy women in the illustrated papers, but there was something about her that drew him. Strength, maybe. Dignity. A quiet determination that showed in every straight back step. After the service, as people spilled out into the sunshine, Franklin lingered near the door. The woman emerged with her son, and for just a moment her eyes met his. They were hazel, he noticed, with flecks of green. She held his gaze for 2 heartbeats, then gave the smallest nod before looking away and continuing down the steps. It was acknowledgement. It was thank you. It was all the communication they needed. Franklin thought that would be the end of it. He had done a good deed. She had accepted it gracefully, and they could both go on with their lives. But he found himself thinking about her at odd moments. While brushing down horses, while mending fence posts, while eating his solitary dinner in his small room. He wondered about her story. Where was the boy's father? Did she have family? How did she manage? A week later, Franklin was at the general store buying supplies when he overheard 2 women talking. He was in the back aisle looking at work gloves when their voices carried over the shelves. "Did you see Fiona Webster's new dress? I wonder where she got the money for that. Perhaps she has a gentleman caller," the other woman said with a tone that suggested scandal. With that child and no husband, what man would bother? Franklin's hands tightened on the gloves he was holding. So her name was Fiona Webster. And apparently the town gossips had noticed the dress. He made his purchase quickly and left before he could hear more. That evening he sat on the steps outside his room as the sun set, turning the Kansas sky orange and pink. Fiona Webster. It was a nice name. He tried not to think about her too much, but she occupied his thoughts anyway. He found himself looking for her when he came into town. Once he saw her at the butcher's shop, carefully counting coins for a small package of meat. Another time he spotted her hanging laundry behind her small house, the boy playing nearby. He never approached her. There was no reason to. He had left the fabric anonymously, and that was how it should stay. But then, 3 weeks after the fabric delivery, something changed. Franklin was riding back to town after a long day at the ranch when he heard crying. He pulled his horse to a stop and listened. It was a child's cry, frightened and pain-filled. He dismounted and followed the sound to a ditch beside the road. The boy, Fiona's son, sat in the dirt holding his arm and sobbing. "Hey there," Franklin said softly, approaching slowly so as not to startle him further. "What happened?" The boy looked up with tear-streaked cheeks. "I fell. My arm hurts." Franklin crouched down and gently examined the arm. It did not look broken, but it was already swelling. "I think you have a nasty sprain. Where's your mama?" "At home. I was not supposed to go this far." The boy's lower lip trembled. "She is going to be so mad." "I think she will just be glad you are all right. What is your name?" "Thomas." "Well, Thomas, I am Franklin. How about I give you a ride home?" He lifted the boy carefully onto his horse, then mounted behind him, keeping one arm secure around Thomas's waist. The boy sniffled but seemed calmer now. They rode slowly toward town, toward the small house with the sagging porch. Fiona was in the front yard, and the moment she saw them approaching, her face went white. She ran toward them before Franklin could even dismount. "Thomas, what happened? Is he hurt?" "He took a fall, madam. His arm is sprained, I think, but nothing broken. He is a brave boy." Franklin carefully handed Thomas down to his mother, who clutched him close for a moment before stepping back to examine his injury. Her hands were shaking as she gently probed the swelling arm. Thomas whimpered but did not cry out. "We need to get this wrapped and elevated," she said, more to herself than to Franklin. She looked up at him then, really looked at him, and recognition flickered in her eyes. "Thank you for bringing him home, Mr. Bishop, Franklin Bishop, and it was no trouble. Mr. Bishop." She said his name slowly as if tasting it. "I am Fiona Webster. This is Thomas." She paused, then added, "Would you like to come in? I should offer you something for your kindness. Coffee, perhaps." Franklin knew he should decline. Accepting her invitation would be crossing a line from anonymous good deed into something more complicated, but he found himself nodding. "Coffee would be nice, madam. Thank you." The inside of the house was small but scrupulously clean. The furniture was old and mismatched, but everything was neatly arranged. A vase of wildflowers sat on the table. Fiona settled Thomas in a chair and quickly wrapped his arm with strips of clean cloth, fashioning a simple sling from a dish towel. Her movements were efficient and practiced, suggesting this was not the first injury she had tended. While the coffee heated on the stove, Franklin sat at the table and looked around. There were few personal items visible. A tintype photograph of a man in uniform sat on the mantel. A child's wooden horse, painted but chipped. A Bible. A sewing basket with neat spools of cream thread. "The fabric," Fiona said suddenly, not looking at him as she poured coffee into 2 chipped cups. "That was you, was not it?" Franklin hesitated. "Madam, I do not know what you mean." "Mr. Bishop." She set a cup in front of him and finally met his eyes. "The note said a friend, but I do not have friends in this town, and you are the only person who has shown me kindness since I arrived here 8 months ago, so I will ask you directly. Was it you?" He could have lied. But something in her direct gaze and the quiet strength of her voice made him tell the truth. "Yes, madam, it was me." She sat down across from him, cradling her own cup. "Why? Because you needed it, and I could help. You do not know me." "No, madam." "But that should not matter when someone needs help." Fiona was quiet for a long moment, studying him over the rim of her cup. Thomas had fallen asleep in his chair, exhausted from crying and the excitement of the ride home. The evening light slanted through the window, making dust motes dance in the air. "My husband died at Little Bighorn," she said finally. 3 months ago. He was a soldier. We were stationed at Fort Dodge, but after he died, the Army had no use for a widow and child. I came here because his mother lived here once before she passed. I thought maybe there would be work, maybe someone who remembered the family. But no one did. No one cares about a soldier's widow in a town like this. Franklin listened without interrupting. He understood loss. His own father had died in the war when Franklin was barely old enough to remember him. His mother had struggled for years before succumbing to illness when he was 16. "I do washing and mending," Fiona continued. "It barely covers rent and food. Thomas is a good boy, but he is young and does not understand why we cannot have things like we used to. And that dress." She shook her head. "That dress was my only decent one, and I caught it on a nail. I tried to mend it, but the fabric was so worn that it just tore more. I thought about not going to church anymore, but Thomas looks forward to it. It is the only time he gets to be around other children, even if they do not play with him." "Why would they not play with him?" Fiona's smile was sad. "Because their parents tell them not to, because we are poor. Because I am a widow without family. People think I might be looking for a husband, and wives do not appreciate that. So they keep their children away from Thomas, and they whisper about me, and we are alone." Franklin felt anger stir in his chest, not at Fiona but at the circumstances, at the smallness of small-town thinking. "That is not right." "No, but it is reality." She took a sip of coffee. "The fabric you left," the note. "It was the kindest thing anyone has done for me in so long. I wanted to thank you, but I did not know who you were. I suspected it might be you when I saw you in church, the way you looked away quickly when I glanced back. But I was not certain until today." "I am glad I could help," Franklin said simply. "And I am glad Thomas is all right." "Stay for dinner," Fiona said suddenly. "Please. It is not much, just stew and bread, but I would like to repay your kindness." Franklin should have said no. Getting involved with Fiona Webster was complicated. She was a widow, he was a single man. The town would talk. But he found himself wanting to stay, wanting to know more about this strong, quiet woman who faced hardship with dignity. "I would like that," he said. Dinner was indeed simple, but the stew was well seasoned and the bread fresh. Thomas woke up long enough to eat a little. Then Fiona put him to bed in the small room off the main living area. When she returned, she and Franklin talked in low voices so as not to wake the boy. She told him about her life before Wyatt, about following her husband from post to post, about the friends she had made and lost as they moved. She told him about the fear of raising a son alone, of not knowing if she could provide for him. Franklin, in turn, told her about his work at the ranch, about his dream of having his own land someday, about the years of drifting from town to town before settling in Wyatt. "Why did you stay here?" Fiona asked. "You could work anywhere." "Why Wyatt?" Franklin considered the question. "I guess I got tired of moving. Wyatt is not much, but it is peaceful, the work is steady. I thought maybe I could build something here, put down roots." "Roots," Fiona echoed. "I used to want that. Now I just want stability, a place where Thomas can grow up safe." They talked until the candles burned low and the moon rose high outside the window. Franklin finally stood to leave, aware that he had stayed much longer than was proper. But Fiona did not seem concerned about propriety as she walked him to the door. "Thank you, Franklin," she said. using his first name for the first time. For everything. For the fabric, for bringing Thomas home, for dinner conversation. It has been a long time since I felt like a person and not just a burden. You are not a burden, Franklin said firmly. Anyone who makes you feel that way is a fool. Her smile was soft in the moonlight. Good night, Franklin. Good night, Fiona. He rode back to his room feeling lighter than he had in months, maybe years. Something had shifted tonight. He had crossed from anonymous helper to friend. And maybe, just maybe, something more could grow from that friendship. The next Sunday, Franklin arrived at church and immediately looked for Fiona. She was in her usual spot with Thomas, whose arm was still in its makeshift sling. When she saw Franklin, she smiled. It was a small smile, careful and tentative, but it was there. He nodded to her and took his seat. After the service, he found himself walking beside her as they left the church. People noticed. He could feel eyes on them, hear the whispers starting. But Fiona walked with her head high, and Thomas chattered happily about the Bible story they had heard. "Mr. Bishop," Fiona said formally, though her eyes held warmth, "perhaps you would like to join us for Sunday dinner?" "I would be honored, Miss Webster." It became their routine. Franklin would sit in the back at church. Fiona would sit in her pew with Thomas, and afterward they would walk together to her small house where she would cook dinner. Sometimes Franklin brought supplies from town, meat or vegetables or flour, always insisting he was just sharing what he had extra. Fiona accepted with grace, understanding the lie for the kindness it was. As the weeks passed, Franklin found himself increasingly drawn to Fiona. She was intelligent and resourceful, with a quiet sense of humor that emerged once she felt comfortable. She could stretch a few ingredients into a filling meal, mend anything with needle and thread, and had a patient way with Thomas that Franklin admired. The boy was starting to come out of his shell too, laughing more, playing with more energy. Franklin helped around the house when he could, fixing the sagging porch, patching holes in the roof, reinforcing the garden fence. He told himself he was just being helpful, just being a good friend. But he knew it was more than that. He was falling for Fiona Webster, and he suspected she might feel the same way. But there were obstacles. The town gossip grew louder. Women at the store whispered behind their hands. Men at the saloon made crude jokes that Franklin ignored with difficulty. Fiona was a widow, only 23 years old, and Franklin was 24. By all rights, they were free to court if they wanted. But small-town morality had its own rules, and apparently Fiona had not been properly mourning her husband. One evening in late September, after the worst of the summer heat had broken, Franklin and Fiona sat on her newly repaired porch while Thomas played in the yard. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "They are talking about us," Fiona said quietly. "More than usual. I know. Does it bother you?" "It bothers me that they think they have any say in how I live my life. My husband has been dead for 6 months. I mourned him. I still mourn him. But I am also alive, and Thomas needs more than a mother who is frozen in grief." Franklin reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he had initiated such contact, and he felt her fingers tighten around his. "What do you want, Fiona?" She turned to look at him, her hazel eyes serious. "I want what everyone wants: happiness, security, a future. But I also know that I come with complications. I have a son. I have almost nothing to my name. I am a widow who people already gossip about. Getting involved with me could damage your reputation." "I do not care about my reputation," Franklin said honestly. "I care about you, about Thomas. You have become the best part of my days. When I am breaking horses or mending fences, I think about Sunday dinners. I think about your laugh when Thomas says something clever. I think about how strong you are, how you keep going even when things are hard." "Franklin." Her voice was soft, almost wondering. I know it has not been long, he continued. And I know you are still healing, but I want you to know that I am here, however you need me to be. Friend, helper, or maybe someday something more. I am not going anywhere. Fiona was quiet for a long moment, her hand still in his. Then she said, "My husband was a good man, but our marriage was not a love match. We were both young and foolish, and I got pregnant. We did what was expected. He tried his best, and I tried mine, but there was not much passion there. When he died, I grieved for the future we would not have, for Thomas losing his father. But I cannot say I was heartbroken." Franklin listened, understanding the trust it took for her to share this. "What I am trying to say," Fiona continued, "is that I do not know much about love, real love. But what I feel when I am with you, it is different. Better. You make me feel valued, you make me laugh, you treat Thomas like he matters, and that means everything. He does matter, you both do." Fiona leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture so natural and right that Franklin felt his heart swell. They sat like that as the sun finished setting and the first stars appeared, Thomas's happy chatter filling the comfortable silence. The next day, Franklin asked for a meeting with his boss at the Granger Ranch. Samuel Granger was a fair man in his 50s, weathered by years of ranch work but still sharp and strong. He listened as Franklin explained his situation. "I have been working here for nearly 6 months now," Franklin said. "I have saved most of my wages. I want to start looking for my own piece of land. Nothing big, just enough to run a small herd, maybe grow some crops, but I will need to keep working until I can get established." Samuel studied him. This about the Webster woman, Franklin was not surprised that Samuel knew. Everyone knew everyone's business. "Yes, sir, partially. She has got a rough reputation in town, not because of anything she did, mind you, but people like to talk. I know, but she is a good woman. Strong and honest and hardworking. She deserves better than what this town gives her." Samuel nodded slowly. "I respect a man who knows his own mind. Tell you what, there is a section of land on the eastern edge of my property. It is not prime grazing, but it has good water and enough flat land for building. I have been thinking about selling it off. If you are interested, we can work out a deal. You keep working for me, and we will count part of your wages toward the purchase price." Franklin's heart raced. "Are you serious?" "I do not joke about land or money, son. You are a good worker, reliable and skilled. I would rather have you nearby than lose you completely. And that land is not doing me much good sitting empty." They shook hands, and Franklin left the meeting feeling like he was walking on air. He had land. Well, he would have land once he finished paying for it, but it was real, it was happening. He could build a house, start a small ranch, have a future. That Sunday, after church and dinner, Franklin took Fiona for a walk while Thomas napped. They followed the road east out of town, toward the land that would soon be Franklin's. When they reached the boundary marked by an old fence post in a creek, Franklin stopped. "This is it," he said. 20 acres. It is not much, but it is mine. Well, it will be mine in a couple years once I pay it off." Fiona looked around at the gently rolling land, the creek lined with cottonwood trees, the endless Kansas sky above. "It is beautiful." "I want to build a house here," Franklin said, pointing to a slight rise that would give a good view in all directions. "Nothing fancy at first, just a solid cabin, but with room to expand. And a barn, of course, and a garden space over there where the soil looks richest." He paused, suddenly nervous. "I am telling you this because I want you to be part of it, you and Thomas. I know we have not been courting long, not officially, but I know what I want. I want a life with you. I want to marry you, Fiona. I want to be Thomas's father and give you both a real home." Fiona's eyes were bright with tears. "Franklin, are you sure? The town already gossips. If we marry so soon after my husband's death, they will never let it go." "Then let them talk. "I do not care, do you?" she laughed, a sound of pure joy. "No, I do not care at all." She took both his hands in hers. "Yes, yes, I will marry you. Thomas and I will build this life with you." Franklin pulled her into his arms and kissed her for the first time. It was sweet and gentle and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both were grinning like fools. "When?" Fiona asked. "When should we marry?" "As soon as possible. Tomorrow if we could, but I suppose we should be a little practical." They decided on 6 weeks. It would give Franklin time to build a basic cabin on his land, would give Fiona time to prepare, and would be close enough that they did not have to wait long. The town could say what it wanted. They were both adults, both free to marry. The rest was noise. Franklin threw himself into building. He worked his regular hours at the Granger Ranch, then spent every spare moment on his own land. Other ranch hands helped sometimes, and Samuel Granger himself came by one Saturday with a wagon full of lumber and supplies. "Consider it a wedding gift," Samuel said gruffly. "Now build something solid. I do not want to hear about my foreman living in a shack." "Foreman," Franklin repeated, stunned. "Did I forget to mention that? My current foreman is retiring next spring. Job is yours if you want it. Better pay too, you will need it with a wife and kid to support." Franklin could barely find words to thank him. Foreman was a position of real responsibility, real respect. It meant steady income and a secure future. The cabin took shape quickly with the help and supplies. It was simple. One main room with a loft above for sleeping, and a smaller room off to the side that could serve as a bedroom for Thomas. Franklin built a stone fireplace that would keep them warm in winter. He added a front porch where they could sit in the evenings. It was not fancy, but it was solid and clean and full of potential. Fiona, meanwhile, was busy preparing in her own way. She had little money, but she used the remaining fabric from Franklin's gift to make curtains and a tablecloth. She collected wildflower seeds to plant around the new cabin. She taught Thomas to call Franklin by his first name, preparing the boy for the transition. Thomas was excited about the upcoming wedding. Though at 5 years old, he did not fully understand what it meant. He just knew they were moving to a new house with Franklin, and Franklin had promised him a puppy once they were settled. The gossip in town reached a fever pitch. Fiona heard whispers at the store, saw disapproving looks at church. One woman, the banker's wife, actually approached her after service. "Mrs. Webster, surely you see how inappropriate this is. Your husband has been dead less than a year." Fiona looked at her calmly. "Mrs. Patterson, with all due respect, my life and my choices are my own. Franklin Bishop is a good man who treats me and my son with respect and kindness. We are both adults, both free to marry. I do not require your approval or anyone else's." Mrs. Patterson huffed and walked away, and Fiona felt Franklin's presence beside her, supportive and solid. "You did not have to defend us," he said quietly. "Yes, I did, because she needs to know that her opinion does not matter, only ours does." They were married in early November on a clear, cold day. Reverend Thompson performed the ceremony despite some pressure from his congregation to refuse. He was an elderly man with kind eyes who told Franklin privately that he admired them for choosing happiness over reputation. The ceremony was small, just Franklin and Fiona, Thomas standing beside them, Samuel Granger and his wife as witnesses, and a handful of ranch hands who respected Franklin. No one from town came except the Reverend. But Fiona did not care. She wore her cream muslin dress, the one Franklin's fabric had become, and carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers. Franklin wore his best clothes, his hair neatly combed, his eyes shining as he promised to love and honor her. Thomas held the rings, 2 simple bands that Franklin had purchased from the traveling jeweler who passed through town. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Franklin kissed Fiona with such tenderness that several of the watching ranch hands had to clear their throats and look away. Afterward, they had a simple dinner at Samuel Granger's house. Mrs. Granger had cooked a feast, far more than their small group could eat. There was music and laughter, and Thomas fell asleep in a chair, exhausted from excitement. As the sun set, Franklin and Fiona rode out to their new cabin with Thomas sleeping in Fiona's arms. Franklin carried her over the threshold, then came back for Thomas, laying the boy gently in his new bed. When he returned to the main room, Fiona was standing by the fireplace, her face glowing in the firelight. "Our home," she said softly. "Our home," Franklin agreed, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "The first night of our life together." They stood like that for a long time, watching the fire burn, feeling the solid walls around them, knowing that whatever challenges came, they would face them together. The first winter in their cabin was cold but happy. Franklin continued working at the Granger Ranch, now with the increased responsibilities and pay of his new position as foreman in training. Fiona made their small cabin into a real home, cooking and cleaning and managing their limited resources with impressive skill. Thomas started to flourish, growing stronger and more confident with Franklin's steady presence in his life. Franklin proved to be a natural father. He was patient with Thomas, teaching him about animals and land, answering his endless questions, playing with him in the evenings. Thomas stopped asking about his biological father and started calling Franklin Papa without being prompted. The first time it happened, Franklin's eyes grew suspiciously bright, and he had to turn away for a moment to compose himself. In January, a blizzard hit Kansas, dumping 2 feet of snow and bringing temperatures so low that the water in the basin froze solid overnight. Franklin made sure they had plenty of wood stocked, and the 3 of them huddled by the fire, playing games and telling stories while the wind howled outside. Thomas loved it, thought it was a grand adventure. Fiona and Franklin exchanged looks over his head, grateful for the solid cabin that kept them safe and warm. During those long winter evenings, Franklin and Fiona grew even closer. They talked about everything, their hopes and fears, their memories and dreams. Fiona told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her parents who had died in a cholera outbreak when she was 15, about the loneliness that had led her to marry a man she barely knew. Franklin told her about his years of drifting, about the feeling of never belonging anywhere, about how she and Thomas had given him a reason to build instead of just survive. "I love you," Fiona said one night as they lay in their bed in the loft, listening to Thomas's soft snoring from below. "I do not think I understood what love really meant until I met you." Franklin kissed her forehead. "I love you too, more than I thought I could love anyone." As winter gave way to spring, Franklin and Fiona started making plans for expanding their small ranch. They had 3 cows now, gifts from Samuel Granger, and a dozen chickens. Franklin wanted to get horses to start breeding and selling them. Fiona planted a large garden, vegetables and herbs and flowers. Thomas helped enthusiastically, if not always effectively, getting more dirt on himself than in the planting holes. In April, Fiona discovered she was pregnant. She told Franklin one evening after Thomas had gone to bed. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a whoop of joy that probably woke Thomas anyway. He spun her around carefully, then set her down and kissed her. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Fiona asked, though she could see the answer on his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it. Fiona, you have given me everything. A home, a family, a future, and now another child. How did I get so lucky?" "We are both lucky," Fiona said, her hand going to her still flat stomach. "We found each other when we needed it most." The pregnancy was not easy. Fiona was sick in the mornings, exhausted in the afternoons, but she never complained. Franklin took over more of the household chores, cooking simple meals and cleaning as best he could. Thomas tried to help too, fetching water and gathering eggs with serious concentration. As summer arrived and Fiona's belly began to swell, Franklin became almost comically protective. He did not want her lifting anything heavy, riding anywhere, or working too hard in the garden. Fiona alternated between being touched by his concern and exasperated by his hovering. "Franklin, I am pregnant, not dying," she said one day when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "But you are my woman," he said stubbornly. "And I am going to take care of you." She softened at that, reaching up to cup his cheek. "You do take care of me, every single day, but I need to feel useful too. Let me do what I can, and I promise I will ask for help when I need it." They compromised. Fiona did light work, and Franklin handled everything else. Samuel Granger, understanding the situation, gave Franklin more flexible hours so he could be home more. The other ranch hands teased him good-naturedly about being under his wife's thumb, but Franklin did not care. His family came first. In September, Thomas started school in Wyatt. It meant a daily trip into town, but Franklin and Fiona agreed it was important. Thomas was bright and eager to learn, and he deserved the chance at education. Franklin built a small cart that Thomas could pull behind their gentlest horse, teaching the boy to ride and handle the animal safely. The first day of school was difficult. Thomas was nervous, and Fiona was emotional, her pregnancy making her cry at the smallest things. But Thomas came home excited, full of stories about the other children and the teacher and everything he had learned. Slowly, he started making friends. The other children did not care about his mother being a widow or his family being poor. They just cared that he was good at games and willing to share his lunch. Through Thomas, Fiona and Franklin started to become more accepted in the community. Parents saw that Thomas was a good influence on their children, polite and kind. They saw that Franklin was a hard worker, respected by Samuel Granger. They saw that Fiona kept a clean home and raised her son well. The gossip did not stop completely, but it quieted to a dull murmur. In late October, when the leaves on the cottonwood trees by their creek turned gold, Fiona went into labor. It was evening, and Thomas was already in bed. Franklin rode like mad to fetch the midwife from town, then paced outside the cabin, too nervous to stay inside but too worried to go far. The labor was long and difficult. Franklin could hear Fiona's cries through the cabin walls, and each one felt like a knife in his heart. He had never felt so helpless. Dawn was breaking when he finally heard a new sound, the thin, angry wail of a newborn. The midwife, a practical woman named Mrs. Henderson, opened the door and beckoned him in. "You have a son, Mr. Bishop, and your wife is tired but well." Franklin entered the cabin on shaking legs. Fiona lay in their bed, pale and exhausted but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. Franklin approached slowly as if in a dream. "Meet your son," Fiona said softly. "I was thinking we could name him Samuel after Mr. Granger. He has been so good to us, but only if you agree." Franklin looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect. His son, his blood. He had never felt anything like the love that crashed over him in that moment. "Samuel is perfect," he managed to say past the lump in his throat. "Samuel Franklin Bishop." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, and Fiona placed the baby in his arms. Franklin held him like he was made of glass, terrified and awed in equal measure. The baby's eyes opened, unfocused but seemingly looking right at Franklin. "Hello, Samuel," Franklin whispered. "I am your papa, and I promise I am going to do everything I can to give you a good life. You and your brother and your mama. You are all my whole world." Thomas woke up an hour later to discover he had a baby brother. He was fascinated and slightly confused, wanting to hold the baby but also not entirely sure about sharing his parents' attention. But when Samuel wrapped his tiny hand around Thomas's finger, the boy's face lit up with wonder. "He is so small," Thomas breathed. "Can we keep him?" Fiona laughed, the sound tired but happy. "Yes, darling, we are definitely keeping him." The next few months were exhausting but joyful. Samuel was a fussy baby, wanting to eat constantly and not sleeping for long stretches. Franklin and Fiona took turns walking him at night, soothing his cries. Thomas helped where he could, fetching things and entertaining the baby with silly faces. Franklin marveled at how quickly life had changed. 2 years ago, he had been a lonely cowboy with no family and no prospects. Now he had a wife he adored, 2 sons, a home, and a secure job. It felt like a miracle. Winter came again, and the Bishop family settled into comfortable routines. Franklin worked at the ranch during the day, though Samuel Granger gave him even more flexibility now that he was officially the foreman. Fiona managed the household and cared for baby Samuel. Thomas went to school and helped with chores. In the evenings, they gathered by the fire, a real family. Samuel Granger and his wife visited often, delighted with their namesake. They had no children of their own, and they doted on both Thomas and baby Samuel. Mrs. Granger brought clothes and blankets, food and supplies. Samuel himself helped Franklin start planning a larger house, something they could build in a year or two when finances allowed. In Wyatt, the Bishops were slowly becoming just another family. The scandal of Franklin and Fiona's quick marriage had faded, replaced by newer gossip. People saw that they were happy, that their family was thriving, that the choices they had made were the right ones. Women who had once shunned Fiona now nodded politely in the store. Men who had made crude jokes now tipped their hats to Franklin with respect. Thomas continued to flourish in school, proving to be a talented student with a particular love for reading. His teacher, Miss Anderson, told Franklin and Fiona that Thomas had real potential, that with encouragement he could go far. They promised to support his education however they could. Baby Samuel grew from a fussy newborn into a happy, chubby infant who laughed easily and loved being held. He had Franklin's light brown hair and Fiona's hazel eyes. Thomas was a devoted big brother, always wanting to play with Samuel, always gentle despite his own young age. On their second wedding anniversary, Franklin and Fiona sat on their porch in the evening, watching the sunset. Samuel was asleep in his cradle, Thomas playing quietly with his toys. The sound of cattle lowing in the distance mixed with the chirp of crickets. "You ever regret it?" Franklin asked. "Marrying me so quickly, letting the town talk, all of it." Fiona looked at him with surprise. "Regret it? Franklin, this has been the happiest time of my life. You gave me everything I needed when I had nothing. Love, security, respect. A real family. How could I possibly regret that? I just worry sometimes that you gave up things, that maybe if you had waited you could have had better." "Better than you?" Fiona shook her head. "There is no better than you, Franklin Bishop. You are the best man I have ever known. And I fall more in love with you every day." Franklin pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I love you too, more than words can say." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Inside the cabin, they could hear Thomas singing softly to himself, a lullaby he had learned from Fiona. It was a perfect moment, the kind that Franklin tried to memorize so he could remember it in harder times. But there were not many hard times. Oh, there were challenges, of course. Cattle got sick, crops struggled in dry years. Thomas broke his arm falling from a tree. But the bishops faced everything together, their love and commitment growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. When Samuel turned 2, Franklin and Fiona started building their new house. It would be larger, with real bedrooms and a proper kitchen. Samuel Granger helped again, as did many of the ranch hands. Even some men from town volunteered their time, having come to respect Franklin and appreciate Fiona's quiet strength. The new house took a year to complete, but it was worth the wait. 2 stories, with 4 bedrooms and a large living area. A real dining room where they could host guests. A wraparound porch where they could sit and watch the sun rise or set. It was more than Franklin had ever dreamed of having. They moved in on a warm spring day, Thomas and Samuel excited to have their own rooms. That night, after the boys were asleep, Franklin and Fiona christened every room of their new house, laughing and loving with the freedom and joy of a couple who had built something real together. As years passed, the Bishop Ranch grew. Franklin's skill with horses became well known in the region. People came from miles around to buy his horses, knowing they were well trained and reliable. Fiona expanded her garden into a small farm, selling vegetables and preserves in town. Thomas grew into a smart, responsible young man who helped with the ranch while continuing his studies. Samuel grew from a chubby baby into an active little boy who followed his father and brother everywhere. When Samuel was 4 and Thomas 12, Fiona became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and Fiona glowed with health. Franklin was still protective but less panicked, having been through it before. The boys were excited, Thomas old enough to help significantly, and Samuel just thrilled about the idea of a baby. In the late summer of 1883, Fiona gave birth to a daughter. She came quickly, born in the early morning just as the sun was rising. Franklin was there this time, holding Fiona's hand, and when he saw his daughter for the first time, he cried openly. "A girl," he said wonderingly. "We have a daughter." They named her Rose after Fiona's mother. She was tiny and perfect, with a wispy cap of dark blonde hair and eyes that would eventually turn blue. The boys were instantly smitten. Thomas held her with careful reverence, and Samuel wanted to be near her constantly. Rose completed their family. Franklin, looking around at his wife and 3 children in their beautiful home on their thriving ranch, felt a gratitude so profound it was almost painful. He had been so lost once, so alone, and now he had this, love and family and belonging. As the years continued to pass, the bishops became pillars of the Wyatt community. Franklin was asked to join the town council. Fiona organized a women's group that raised money for the school. Thomas went off to a teaching college in Topeka, determined to become an educator himself. Samuel showed signs of following in his father's footsteps, with a natural gift for working with horses. Rose grew into a bright, spirited girl who had both her mother's strength and her father's gentle nature. Samuel Granger, now elderly, spent most of his time at the Bishop Ranch, treated as family. He taught the boys to play chess and told them stories about the early days of Kansas. When he died peacefully in his sleep at 74, Franklin wept like he had lost his own father. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, marking the grave with a simple stone that read, "Samuel Granger, friend and mentor." Franklin took over full ownership of the Granger Ranch, combining it with his own land. It was more than he had ever imagined owning, enough to support his family and leave something substantial for his children. He and Fiona made decisions together, equal partners in all things. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Franklin took Fiona back to the spot where he had first told her about his land, where he had asked her to marry him. The cabin they had built was still standing, used now for storage, but the memories it held were precious. "Remember when I told you I wanted to build a life here?" Franklin said, holding her hand. "Remember how scared I was that you would say no?" "I was never going to say no," Fiona replied, leaning against him. "I was already in love with you by then. From the moment you left that fabric on my porch, probably. Maybe even before in church when you looked away so quickly." 15 years, Franklin marveled. 3 children, 2 houses, more happiness than I knew existed, and I still fall in love with you every day. Only every day. Fiona teased. "I fall in love with you every hour." They kissed, long and sweet, the kiss of a couple who knew each other completely and loved what they knew. In the distance, they could hear their children playing, their laughter carrying on the wind. It was everything Franklin had ever wanted, everything he had not even known to want. Life continued its steady rhythm. Thomas graduated from college and returned to Wyatt as a teacher, eventually marrying a local girl and starting his own family. Samuel took over most of the daily operations of the ranch, proving to be as skilled as his father. Rose grew into a beautiful young woman with a sharp mind and a kind heart. Franklin and Fiona grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces marking with the lines of years spent laughing and working and living. But their love never dimmed. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, still held hands, still found joy in each other's company. On a fall evening in 1896, as they sat watching the sunset, Fiona said, "Do you remember that dress? The one that started everything, the torn one, of course. Why, I saved it. All these years I kept the pieces. I thought maybe someday I would tell Rose about it, about how her father noticed a woman in a torn dress and decided to help, about how something so simple changed everything." Franklin squeezed her hand. "It was not the dress, it was you, your strength, your dignity. The way you held your head high even when you had every reason to despair. That was what caught my attention. Still, if you had not left that fabric, we might never have really met. I might have stopped going to church out of embarrassment. We might have remained strangers." "I do not think so," Franklin said. "I think somehow, some way we would have found each other. Some things are just meant to be." Fiona smiled, the same smile that had captured his heart 21 years ago. "Maybe you are right, but I am still grateful for that fabric. For the kindness of a stranger who became my whole world." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Inside the house, they could hear Rose practicing on the piano they had bought her, the notes floating through the open windows. Samuel was in the barn, finishing evening chores. Thomas and his family would be over for Sunday dinner tomorrow. It was an ordinary evening, the kind they had shared thousands of times. But it was also extraordinary because they were together, because they had built this life from nothing but determination and love. Franklin thought back to that young cowboy who had sat in a church 21 years ago, noticing a woman's torn dress. He thought about the decision to help, the choice to leave fabric and a simple note. Such a small thing, but it had changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Fiona asked, always able to read his expressions. "About how lucky I am, about how one small choice led to this entire life. About how much I love you." "I love you too," Fiona said. "Today and always." As the stars began to emerge, Franklin and Fiona rose and went inside, ready for dinner, ready for another evening with their family, ready for whatever came next. Because they had each other, and that made them ready for anything. The seasons turned, years passing like pages in a beloved book. Franklin and Fiona watched their children grow and start families of their own. They became grandparents, delighting in a new generation of children running through the ranch. The house that had seemed so large when they built it now felt just right when filled with family on holidays and special occasions. Samuel took a wife, a rancher's daughter from a neighboring county. Rose married a young doctor who opened a practice in Wyatt. Thomas and his wife had 4 children who spent summers at the ranch, learning to ride and work the land. The Bishop family tree grew strong and wide, roots deep in Kansas soil. Franklin and Fiona aged gracefully, their bodies slowing but their minds sharp. They still worked, though less strenuously now. Franklin spent hours training horses, his patience and skill still remarkable. Fiona tended her garden, now helped by daughters-in-law and grandchildren. They still sat on the porch every evening, still held hands, still found new things to talk about after decades of conversation. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party. The whole town came, it seemed. The ranch house overflowed with people, with laughter and music and abundant food. Franklin stood on the porch and looked at the crowd, marveling at how much had changed since that day he had left fabric on a widow's porch. "Speech," someone called, and others took up the cry. Franklin raised his hands for quiet, uncomfortable with being the center of attention but willing to try. "I am not much of a speechmaker," he began, "but I want to say thank you to this town for giving us a chance, even when we did not fit the mold, to our friends for standing by us, to our children for making us prouder than we ever thought possible." He paused, looking at Fiona, who stood beside him. "And most of all, to my wife. 30 years ago, I noticed a woman in church. She had a torn dress and a dignified bearing, and something in my heart recognized her. I left some fabric on her porch with a simple note, never imagining it would lead to this, to a lifetime of love, to a family beyond my wildest dreams, to happiness I did not know existed." His voice grew thick with emotion. "Fiona, you took a chance on a cowboy with nothing but good intentions and big dreams. You built this life with me, raised our children, stood beside me through every challenge. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And I love you more today than I did 30 years ago, which I would not have thought possible." The crowd applauded, many wiping tears. Fiona kissed Franklin softly, not caring who was watching. "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "Forever." The party continued late into the night, but eventually, people drifted home. Their children cleaned up, then they too left, going to their own homes and families. Finally, Franklin and Fiona were alone on their porch, the stars bright overhead, the sound of cattle and horses familiar and comforting. 30 years, Fiona said softly. "It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all." "I know what you mean. Sometimes I still feel like that young cowboy, nervous about talking to you. And then I look at our grandchildren and realize how much time has actually passed." "Do you have any regrets?" Franklin considered the question seriously. "No, not a single one. Every choice led me here to you, to this life. How could I regret any of it?" "Good," Fiona said, "because I do not regret anything either, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts because they made the good parts sweeter." As they sat in the darkness, surrounded by the life they had built, Franklin felt a profound sense of peace. He had started with nothing and built everything that mattered. He had loved and been loved. He had raised children and watched them thrive. He had made a mark on the world, not a grand or famous mark, but a good one nonetheless. The years continued to pass, each one a gift. Franklin and Fiona slowed further, but they remained active and engaged. They babysat grandchildren, attended church every Sunday, hosted family dinners. Their love, tested by time and deepened by shared experience, remained the foundation of everything. When Franklin was 70, he became ill with pneumonia. It was winter, and the cold settled into his lungs despite Fiona's best efforts to nurse him. For a week, he battled the fever and cough, and Fiona rarely left his side. Their children came, worried and helpless. But Franklin's strength, built up over decades of hard work, pulled him through. He recovered slowly, but he recovered. "You scared me," Fiona said one evening as he sat in a chair by the fire, wrapped in blankets, still weak but on the mend. "I scared myself," Franklin admitted. "I am not ready to leave you yet. We have more sunsets to watch, more grandchildren to spoil. More anniversaries to celebrate," Fiona added. She knelt beside his chair, something she rarely did anymore with her aging knees. "Franklin, I do not know what I would do without you. You have been my partner, my love, my best friend for over 30 years. The thought of losing you—" "Hey," he said gently, cupping her face with a hand that trembled slightly from weakness. "I am still here, and I plan to be here for a good while longer. We are going to grow very, very old together. That is the plan. I am holding you to that." He did recover fully, regaining his strength over the following months. But the illness had reminded them both of their mortality, of the fact that their time together, however blessed, was finite. They treasured each day more consciously after that, finding joy in small moments and simple pleasures. Their 35th anniversary came and went, marked by a quiet family dinner. Their 40th was similar, Franklin now 74 and Fiona 73, both moving more slowly but still sharp and engaged with life. They had outlived many of their generation. Samuel Granger's wife had passed. Several of the ranch hands Franklin had worked with were gone. But the Bishops remained, stubborn and strong, unwilling to let go of the life they had built. On a spring morning in 1911, Franklin woke early as he always had. The sunrise painted their bedroom in shades of gold. Beside him, Fiona slept peacefully, her gray hair loose on the pillow, her face relaxed. She was still beautiful to him, every line and wrinkle a mark of their shared life. He watched her for a moment, feeling the familiar surge of love and gratitude. 46 years. They had been married for 46 years, together for longer than that. It was a lifetime, and it still was not enough. Fiona's eyes opened, and she smiled at him. "Good morning. Good morning, my love." They rose and dressed, moving through their morning routine with the ease of long practice. Breakfast was simple, toast and eggs and coffee. They ate on the porch, watching the ranch wake up around them. Their son Samuel, now middle-aged himself, was already in the barn. Grandchildren would be over later, on their way to or from school, stopping for cookies and hugs. It was an ordinary day, unremarkable in every way except that it was another day they had together. And that made it extraordinary. As Franklin sat with his coffee, Fiona's hand in his, he thought again about that Sunday morning so many years ago, about a torn dress and a simple decision to help. About fabric left on a porch with an anonymous note, such a small thing, but it had been the beginning of everything. "What are you thinking about?" Fiona asked, the question as familiar as breathing. "About a torn dress," Franklin said. "About a cowboy who noticed and decided to do something about it. About the best decision I ever made." Fiona squeezed his hand. "The best decision we ever made," she corrected. "I could have refused the fabric or rejected your courtship or said no when you proposed, but I did not. Because I recognized you, Franklin. My heart recognized yours, and it said yes, this is the man I have been waiting for. And I have been grateful ever since." They sat in silence, comfortable and content as the sun climbed higher and the day unfolded around them. Their story, which had started with such uncertainty and hardship, had become something beautiful and enduring. They had built a life on love and determination, on kindness and faith. They had raised children, created a legacy, and loved each other with a depth that only time and shared experience could create. Franklin looked at his wife, at his home, at his land stretching out in all directions. He thought about his children and grandchildren, about the family name that would continue long after he was gone. He thought about the reputation he had built, not for wealth or fame, but for honesty and hard work and treating people right. Most of all, he thought about love. About how one small act of kindness had opened the door to a lifetime of it. About how choosing compassion over indifference had brought him everything that mattered. "I love you, Fiona," he said, the words as true and necessary as they had been the first time he spoke them. "I love you too, Franklin," she replied. "Today and always." They sat together on their porch, watching the world wake up, their hands clasped tight, their hearts beating in rhythm after nearly 5 decades together. The morning sun warmed their faces, and the sounds of the ranch provided a familiar symphony. Their story, born from a torn dress and a cowboy's kind heart, had become a testament to the power of love, the importance of choosing compassion, and the beauty of 2 lives joined as one. And in that moment, with everything they had built around them and the love of their life beside them, Franklin and Fiona Bishop knew they had lived well. They had loved deeply and been loved in return. They had created something lasting and good, and that was more than enough. That was everything.